It's good to see each of you here this morning. Kath and I made our way back at a decent time yesterday from Santa Fe. We left there at a decent time, but there was thunderstorms between there and here. And even once we landed in Austin, they kept us captive in that plane for an hour and a half before they even pulled up to the gate. So if I say Elijah today instead of Elisha or something along that line, you'll just have to bear with me because I may be a thought or two behind where we're reading. We're in 2 Kings chapter 6. 2 Kings chapter 6. Let's pray together. Our Holy Father, we're so thankful for this day. We're thankful for the blessings of this past week. We're thankful especially, Holy Father, for the fellowship that we have with you that's available because of what Christ has done. We pray that we would live in such a way that our practice would be righteousness, that we would continue to strive to let the light of the gospel shine through our lives, that we might come in contact with others, Holy Father, who would express interest in the faith, and that we would be able to tell them about the good news. We're thankful for your word that's been preserved for us. Thank you for your love for us, the love the Savior has for us, the love of the Spirit, and for your angels, Holy Father, who minister to us in the ways that you see fit. In Jesus' name, amen. We're dealing with the northern kingdom of Israel in the first number of chapters in 2 Kings. Remember, just by way of reminder, the kingdom was united at one point for about 120 years under the rulership of Saul, David, and Solomon. But it was after Solomon, though, you have the kingdom divided. 10 tribes migrate to the north under the leadership of Jeroboam. 2 tribes stay to the south under the leadership of Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. Capital city in the southern, Jerusalem. Capital city in the northern, Samaria. And that'll be helpful in regards to what we read at the latter part of chapter 6, first part of chapter 7. The prophet that is on the scene at this time is Elisha. We see that there's going to be growth. There's a need now for more space. So as we begin chapter 6, the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "Behold, now this place where we dwell before thee is too strait," the American Standard, small, not enough room. Let us go, verse 2, to the Jordan, take every man a beam, let us make a place there where we may dwell. And he answered, "Go ye." And they say, "Well, we want you to come with us." And he says, "Okay, I'll go," verse 3. So he went with them, and they came to the Jordan. They cut down wood, and there happened to be one who was cutting down a beam, and the axe head fell into the water, and he cried to Elijah, "Alas, my master, for it was borrowed." Elijah says, "Where did it fall? Where did it fall in the water and sink?" And he showed him the place. So Elisha cut down a stick, cast it in thither, and made the iron to swim. And he said, "Take it up to thee." So he put out his hand and took it. And he comments on that very simple miracle of Elisha. We understand the power was only in that God gave him this power to do it. He did not have it himself. Anything on that? Very basic and very straightforward. But had we been there, had we been one of the workers, no doubt we had a story to tell for a number of years, something we had never seen before. Well, the king of Syria, we're going to hear a lot about him now. He's warring against Israel. He takes counsels with his servants, saying, "In such and such a place shall be my camp." This is where we're going to go. And again, Elisha referred to the man of God. He sent to the king of Israel and he said, "Beware that you don't pass this particular place, because that's where the Syrians are going to be." Verse 9. And the king of Israel sent to the place just to check that out, which the man of God told him and warned him of. And obviously, by the latter part of what it says in verse 10, this happened on more than one occasion, which then caused the heart of the king of Syria to be troubled. He calls his servants and he thinks, what's got to be going on in order for this to be happening time and time again? There's got to be a spy within our camp. And one of his servants says in verse 12, no, Elisha, the prophet that is in Israel, he tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedchamber. So he says, you go and see where he is, that I may send and fetch him. And so he is told, well, he's in Dothan. Therefore sent he, the king of Syria, horses and chariots, a great army. And they came by night and they compassed the city about. And when the servant of the man of God was risen early and gone forth, behold, a host of horses and chariots was round about the city. So they are surrounded by this Syrian army. His servant said to Elisha, alas, my master, what are we going to do? How shall we do? And he answered, fear not, for they that are with us are more than they that are with them. We might pause there. This isn't the only time we've seen people of God in their first response to someone who they see as afraid, say nothing but simply, first of all, don't be afraid. We're afraid sometimes about the various things that happen in our lives, and what we need is when we're afraid because of maybe of an uncertainty or something that is going on, we need people that will remind us that we don't have to be afraid. We can overcome that, and then to validate that reason you don't need to be afraid is because, as in this case, they that are with us are more than they that are with them. Even when we seem to be in the minority, and we might be afraid because we're not. We prayed a few moments ago regarding our thanksgiving for the angelic force, that we may be somewhat challenged as far as just understanding just how that works as far as God is concerned. But I can read this, and by faith, in Hebrews chapter 1, the context of verse 13 is angels, and he follows that up in verse 14. Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to do service for the sake of them that shall inherit salvation? I may not know exactly how God uses that force, but I know that force is greater than any earthly force that you and I might face. In the moment, I might be afraid, and I might need you, because of your understanding and your remembering of something even along this line, to remind me, you don't have to be afraid. Remember, those that are with us are more than those that are against us. Any comments? Yes, Brother Jim.
Similar situation happened with Elijah, as I recall. He was alone when God chose him. And this phrase, he opened his eyes.
Yes.
What you described is our version of opening our eyes.
That's right. That's right. You remember Elijah when he comes to that point in his life where he basically says, take my life. He believes, even though he's just really not thinking clearly, because we had already established up to that point in time, he should be remembering, he's not the only one. But in that moment, that's what he felt. So I don't want to discredit him there. But even though he felt that, there was 7,000 others who had not bowed the knee either. He just wasn't thinking about that. Elisha prayed. Again, this is something that we notice that he did. He did the same thing, again, regarding the son of the Shunammite woman back in chapter 4. He prays and says, Jehovah, I pray thee, open his eyes. Obviously, Elisha is aware of the force that's there, that's greater than those that are against them. But his servant is not able to see, has not been allowed to see with those types of eyes. So Jehovah listened to the prayer, answered the prayer, opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses. Well, there was horses. There were Syrian horses, so I don't think there's anything different about those horses, but there was something different about the chariots. Chariots of fire round about Elisha. The Syrian army, comes down to him, and Elisha prays again to Jehovah, and he says, smite this people, I pray thee, with blindness. And God smote them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. This blindness here is also similar to sometimes a blindness that we see in other places, that it's not going to be complete blindness, because they're going to be able to follow to some extent what's getting ready to happen. But it is not where they're not seeing as clear as they were. Elisha said to them, this is not the way, neither is this the city. You're in the wrong place. Follow me. I'm going to bring you to the man whom you seek. And so he led them to Samaria. It came to pass when they were come to Samaria, Elisha said, Jehovah, again a prayer, open the eyes of these men, that they may see. And Jehovah opened their eyes, and they saw, and behold, they were in the midst of Samaria. What a surprise, huh? Maybe we would say their heart probably sank within their chest. The king of Israel sees again the occasion, and again things have really turned in his favor, and he says to Elisha, shall I smite them? Shall I smite them? And Elisha's answer is what? No, you should not. Would you smite those that you had taken captive with sword and with bow? In fact, I don't want you to smite them. I want you to do what? You need to feed them. Set before them bread and water, that they may eat and drink and go to their master. And so this great provision is provided. And after they had eaten and drink, he sent them away, and they went to their master. Imagine what that story was like when they came back to the king of Syria. Did you get him? Did you bring the man who I sent you for? Well, no, things didn't quite work out that way. We went to where we were told he was, but then something happened, and we really couldn't see, and we got led someplace, and then when we could see again, we're right in the middle of the enemy. And well, then you can imagine the people that are hearing this story. And then what happened? They fed us. They fed us, and they sent us on our way. And so for a while, you're going to see that the bands of Syria, obviously the king has somewhat of a change of heart for a period of time, so he no longer sends any more raids into the land of Israel. Comments? Yes, ma'am.
Didn't Elisha lie to them in verse 19? It just seems to me strange that he has God with him to the point that he can make these people blind, and then he just outright lies to them and said, oh no, you're not at the right city, but they were at the city they were looking at. So it's just an outright lie. It's just such a contrast to me that he has to make this what he might think was a little white lie to them, in the face of the fact that he can strike them all blind.
Sure. Any comments on that?
As these men were the Syria, we as Christians still have the ability to pray to God, because he gave it to us. And through his Son, we have the strength to resist anything that man can throw at us. Because even if we die, we're going someplace better.
Sure. Sister Marnita's comment is in regards to Elisha. And once the Syrian army came down, and then God answers his prayer regarding smiting them with blindness. Let's keep these things in mind. Elisha is going to pray that this army can't see. Now, that would seem to suggest, as we go through this, that God already has an idea what Elisha is going to do next. I'm not trying to justify anything yet. We're going to open it back up for comment in just a moment, just kind of leading you through this. So then once he grants that request that they are unable to see, then he says, well, you haven't found the person that you're looking for. I'll bring you to that particular man. And then we'll comment on that in just a moment. Yes, sir.
My take on this is a matter of opinion. They thought they were in the right place, but the place God had in mind for them was of His choosing. And they wound up exactly where they needed to be. And of course, it worked out very favorable as far as the Syrian invaders were concerned.
It did. Let me get you to think about this for a moment. We looked at the story from the standpoint of the king of Syria. It keeps being known where his camp is going to be. And so he asks, thinking, first of all, there's a spy within, and then somebody tells him, no, it's Elisha. Where is he? He's in Dothan. Go get him. Now, I haven't read anything yet so far where Elisha has told, hey, the king of Syria knows all about those times that you've been telling his people where they're going to be. And all of a sudden, they're surrounded. I don't know that Elisha knows when this army surrounds them why they're there. But even so, when he sees this army, he still knows, but based upon his ability to see the God-given vision of this greater army, he still knows, well, that no big deal. And then his servant is able to see. The army of the Syrians come down. Elisha prays that they're blinded. And then he says to them, if he does not know that they're there for him, that is what I cannot find. If I'm Elisha and I don't know they're there for me, when they come into the camp, he says to them, follow me and I will bring you to the man whom you seek. If I don't know who they're seeking, who might I think this army should be seeking? Who would be the number one guy on the list? The king would be the one. And where does he bring them? He brings them to the capital city of Samaria where the king is. That's a possible explanation. If not, Sister Marnita, he does in some way deceive them, but this whole deception is under the blessing of God because he's going to bring this army that's coming for Elisha, and he's going to take them to Samaria. He's going to feed them, and then for a while, you're going to have peace. Comments? Yes, Brother Jim, and then Sister Bobby.
A little different topic. I just back it up a little bit. I love the phrase about where the king is going. You know, he knows what you say even in your bedchamber.
Yeah.
Not just what you said out with a group of people, but he knows what you're thinking. Basically.
Yes.
That's pretty powerful.
Brother Jim points out that when the king of Syria thinks there's a spy, someone says, no, Elisha, there's a prophet in Israel. He's the one telling the king of Israel your words. In fact, even if you're speaking these things in your bedchamber, in your most secretive place, he's hearing these things. And there is definitely a parallel there regarding God and how well he knows us. Sister Bobby?
I was just reminded that this is not the first time we've seen someone tell something other than the truth. We saw that with Rahab and the spies, but you have to keep in mind that these people, that were doing that are, they are trying to do their Lord's will.
Yes.
They're looking out for the welfare of God's people, and you have to keep in mind that God's providence is over.
Sister Bobby makes a good point. This isn't the first time that you will see something. Let's just say that in some way, no excuses, Elisha was deceptive in some way. Well, this is not the first time God's people have ever been deceptive before, or someone ever lied and the purpose of God was carried out. She mentioned Rahab the harlot. We could go back further than that. We could go back to the days of Egyptian bondage regarding the Egyptian handmaids and what kind of, remember what they were told to do if a certain child was born, and then Pharaoh was asking, well, how come you're not carrying that out? And they would basically say, so there's been other occasions where that would be the case. And I will just offer, if what I've said in regards to him not being the man is not right, remember, he is a prophet of God, which means there are times in his life where he is under the influence or he's able to speak for God, But don't forget that separate and apart from that, he's just a what? He's just a man. And in that physical state, in that state, there are going to be times when he's going to do what? The Apostle Paul did the same thing. He talks about a spiritual side of him in the book of Romans. He says, I delight in the law after the inward man. I've noted before, we're in class right now. We'll be in worship in a little while. And during that time, what part of us is being stimulated? Inward or outward? I realize we might be built up outwardly, but there is this idea of the reason in that moment we're going, that's exactly right. We're not going to be afraid if that army looks bigger, because we're going to remember the army for us is greater. See, that's fine right now. But then go out those doors, go back into your life tomorrow, and all of a sudden that army that you should be remembering, well, you've got a greater defense than that. All of a sudden Satan's got you, and now you're scared, right? Well, that's the outward man, right? Paul says, I delight in the law of God after the inward man. No doubt Elisha many times would delight in that law, but then Paul would even say, I see a different law in my members, warring against the law of my mind. So again, even in Elisha's case, to be fair to him, he's just a man. And in the moment, maybe he deceives them. I don't know if he knows exactly how this is all going to work out, but again, it does. Anything else? Yes, Brother Jim.
To Marnita's comment, I've done this, it's been done to me, especially in family matters. Sometimes a question is asked, and the answer has nothing to do with the question. It's not said, if my children persist with this question, I can tell them, I'm not going to answer your question. This is what I'm going to respond to, how I'm going to respond to. So while that might not have been said here, and many times when a person asks a question that's none of their business, that they're seeking information that might, not in this context, of course, it's not here, but in a context where someone may want to use that maliciously, you answer something with something else. I don't think you're lying. And example, I have a will. Some of my family's in a will. Some of them are not. This is going out on the air, so if they're listening, they know that. But if my children ask me, and I don't want to tell them, but I don't want to say I'm not going to answer that, I may answer with another response. I'm not lying to them. I'm withholding information that I don't want them to know about.
So,
and that's my purpose.
Sure.
And as a father, I can have that opportunity. So, technically, I don't think that's lying, but that's what I see.
So a question might, Brother Jim says, a question might be asked, and we might respond in a way where we don't, in essence, answer the question of a prerogative. We don't have to answer the question, and that not be in any way a lie or deceptive, but just the nature of the answer. Either way, Elisha is doing his best to serve God in this moment when this particular event unfolds and this army surrounds them. The answer to his prayer is, yes, I will strike them blind. And then Elisha, because of his understanding of how this is either going to work out, or just because he just had a lot of common sense, or he was able to think on his feet, says, oh, I know what I'll do now. I'll take them to the city of Samaria. And so he does. And then when their eyes are opened again, there they are. And then he not only doesn't allow them to be hurt in such a way, he pronounces a blessing upon them. Now, if we look at this from the standpoint of we're in the Syrian army, this has just basically worked out just so different than we thought it would. And now we've seen actually godliness portrayed. A man of God has seen fit that we would be fed instead of injured. Now we would take that back, and now we've had an occasion to see what God looks like as opposed to the idols that we serve in Syria. Very good. Anything else on that?
Well, one thing that I love about this is probably silly, but this is in Egypt, women killing the babies. It's a first example of the woman always being right in her position. I know that's a weird thing to say, but it seems like they were doing what God wanted them to do in the first place.
Yes, we'd have to go back and look at that. I think you're speaking of the midwives in Exodus chapter 1, again, who feared God. Don't forget that. That's Exodus 1 and verse 17, the midwives who feared God. You can go back and read that, and based upon their fearing God, what they did in regards to the babies that were being born, not following the command of Pharaoh. Well, time passes, and you might want to put a little note there at verse 24, because between verse 23 and 24, some time is going to pass. But as time passes, Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all the host, went up, and he besieged Samaria. So now there's a great famine in Samaria. So the idea of besieging, they would just surround this city, choke off all supplies, and just wait it out. Okay, so there is a famine. Again, there's going to be a shortage of supplies within the capital city of Samaria. And now things are so bad that things such as a donkey's head and also a fourth part of a cob of dove's dung are sold for quite a lot of money, so that maybe only those that are really wealthy could afford such a thing. The king of Israel, things have got so bad, he's passing up on the wall. A woman cries out to him, and she asks for help. His first reply is, well, if the Lord can't help you, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to bring you something out of the threshing floor or out of the winepress? These supplies are gone. The king says to her, what's going on? And she then begins to tell him what has happened, how bad things have got. There was another woman, and the other woman said, give thy son that we may eat him today. And that was done. And then the plan was they'd do the same to her son the next day. But then she hid her son. If you want to make a note, your Bible may have references, but you can look back at Deuteronomy 28. There'll be some verses in Deuteronomy 28 where God said in the context, if you don't continue to follow my commands, if you rebel, these are going to be the consequences of what's going to happen. And there are some verses there that says this exact thing. This is what's going to happen. Husbands are going to turn against wives, brothers against sisters, mothers against their own children. This is how desperate it will become. This isn't the only time of such an occurrence. Well, when the king heard this, he rent his clothes. The people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth upon his flesh. In the moment, he says, God, do so to me, verse 31, and more also, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, shall stand on him this day. He concludes in the moment, this is whose fault? Yes, but he's going to carry out his vengeance upon not God, but Elisha. In the moment, it's like this is Elisha and the God that Elisha. We're going to get Elisha. In fact, we're going to go cut his head off. Well, Elisha's somewhere. Again, I don't see Elisha knowing exactly how all this is unfolding, but he's going to be someplace, and as these guys get closer, he's going to tell them, well, here's what they're coming for. He's sitting in his house. The elders were sitting with him. The king sends a man before him, and before the messengers ever arrive, Elisha says, see ye how this son of a murderer, he refers to the king, has sent to take away my head? Look, when the messenger cometh, shut the door, don't let him in, hold the door fast against him. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him? And while he was yet talking with them, the messenger came down to him, just as Elisha had seen and knew. And he said, behold, this evil of Jehovah, why should I wait for Jehovah any longer? And Elisha said, hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, tomorrow. Now they're in the middle of a famine. It is so bad that we've just read about events there that we just can't even comprehend. There's just hardly anything left as far as food is concerned. Total desperation. Elisha says, tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria. Now in the moment, this captain on whom the king leaned answered the man of God in his unbelief, even if the Lord should make windows in heaven, what you've just said is what? Impossible. That can't happen. And Elisha says to him, you're going to see it, but what? You will not partake thereof. A curse is pronounced upon this man because of his unbelief. There were 4 lepers, and they lived outside the gate. They're at the entrance of the gate, and they said to one another, they're there, they still have the ability to reason. Physically, no doubt they would be pathetic, very sick, no doubt on their way to death. If it wasn't going to be leprosy, they're concluding they're going to die some other way, and they say, why are we sitting here? Why sit we here until we die? If we say we're going to enter into the city, well, if we go into the city, we're not going to live in there because there's a famine within the city. There's no food in there. People are going to be dying if they're not already. If we sit here, as we have been doing, we're going to die. So they conclude, let's just fall into the host of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live. If they kill us, we were going to die anyway. They rose up at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians. They came to the outermost part of the camp of the Syrians. You imagine what that's like? You're 4 lepers. You're not chosen men of war. You don't have some great physical ability to outmuscle some of these Syrians. You're at their mercy. And you're walking, I don't know, gingerly toward this camp. You get to the outermost part of the camp of the Syrians, and there's nobody there. Why? Verse 6, for the Lord had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots, a noise of horses, even the noise of a great host. So you're a part of the Syrian army. You've been there. You're besieging the city of Samaria. Things are going well. This is going to work out pretty soon. And on one given night, out of nowhere, the entire army hears within their ears what sounds as though an even greater army. And so you say, lo, the king of Israel hath hired against us the king of the Hittites, the king of Egyptians, who are come upon us. And so they ran for their life. They left their tents, horses, donkeys. They left the camp, verse 7, as it was, and fled for their life. When the lepers came to the outermost part of the camp, they went into a tent. They find food. They find something to drink. So they ate and they drank. And because they were thinking ahead, they carried some silver and gold and raiment, and they went and hid it. They came back, they went into another tent, found some more treasure. They went and hid that as well, making plans. In the process of doing this, they said one to another, we're not doing what's right. This day is a day of good tidings, and we hold our peace. If we tarry till the morning light, punishment will overtake us, convicted within their own heart regarding what they were doing. Therefore, come, let us go and tell the king's household. So you can imagine now, if you're living in the city of Samaria, maybe you're keeping guard of the gate. Because it's dark, you have no idea what's happened out there within the Syrian army who's had you surrounded. All of a sudden, these guys show up at the porter, again, the porters who are keeping the gate of the city, and they tell you, we came to the camp of the Syrians, and behold, there's no man there, no voice of man. The horses are tied, donkeys are there, tents as they were. And he called the porters, and when they told it to the king's household within, and the king, so now you have the porters who take the message to the king. You imagine if you're the king, and now this is the message that comes. Where did you hear this? Well, there's these 4 lepers. And they came, and that's what they reported. You know, at first I'm going to be kind of going, really? But then he says, well, okay, well, let's don't send everybody out there. Let's just gather a few. The king arose at night, said to his servant, I'll now show you what the Syrians have done to us. They know we're hungry, therefore they've gone out into the camp. This is a trap. As soon as we come out of the city, everybody together, well, they're going to kill us all. And so one of his servants says, well, then just take maybe 5 of the horses that remain. See how desperate that was? You might want to note verse 13. That just shows you just how bad it is. I pray thee, 5 of the horses that remain, which are left in the city, take them. Let us send and see. Just send a few. Let a few men go. They took therefore 2 chariots with horses, and the king sent after the host of the Syrians, saying, go and see. They went after them unto the Jordan, and lo, all the way. What are they finding? They're finding garments and vessels which the Syrians had cast away in their haste, and the messengers returned and told the king. Any comments up to this point? I told Kathy yesterday, sitting somewhere, I don't believe it was last night in the Austin airport, because we were a little frustrated. Told her somewhere yesterday, years ago, I heard a lesson taught on this particular story, more specifically about these 4 lepers. And the title of the lesson was The Sin of Silence. And he preached that lesson in such a way that he looked at these men who, once they realized what they were doing, realized that it was not right for them not to share the good tidings. And then he went from here to the good news and the glad tidings that we have. And how that when we don't tell people about the Lord and the hope that is in him, when we remain silent, that in essence could be sin, which is why we should ask for opportunities and then the courage to share the gospel with others. The people went out, verse 16, they plundered the camp of the Syrians. And so the very next day, just as Elisha had said, a measure of fine flour was sold for a shekel, also 2 measures of barley, according to the word of the Lord. The king appointed the captain, the unbelieving captain, on whose name he leaned, the one who said something about even if Jehovah should open the windows of heaven. That captain, he gave him charge of the gate. And the people trod upon him in the gate, and he died, as the man of God had said, who spake when the king came down to him. It came to pass, as the man of God had spoken to the king, saying, 2 measures of barley for a shekel, and 2 measures of fine flour for a shekel, shall be tomorrow about this time in the gate of Samaria. And that captain answered and said, that's not possible. Behold, Elisha had told him, you'll see it, but you won't eat thereof. It came to pass, even so unto him, for the people trod upon him in the gate, and he died. Comments on chapter 7? The Shunammite woman. You remember her from earlier? This was the one, again, that Elisha had raised her son. Well, we see in chapter 8, Elisha spoke to the woman whose son he had restored to life, and he said, arise and go thou and your household and sojourn wherever you can, for Jehovah hath called for a famine, and it shall come upon the land 7 years. Remember, as we've talked about before, that there are times when you're reading that you're going to find that the Bible isn't necessarily in what kind of order? Chronological order. And this is really one of those times, because chapter 8, and we're going to actually see something that a little further as we read along, you might have noted it already, seems to be something that kind of maybe preceded even the famine that we just talked about in chapter 7. Be that as it may, the woman, according to the words of Elisha, she trusted him. She did according to what Elisha told her. She took her household, and she sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. Well, it's at the end of the 7 years, if she comes back, the famine is no longer there. What has happened in chapter 7 has happened, and now things are good again. She went forth. Remember, she has land, but once she left, that land again would have been forfeited. She went forth to cry to the king for her house and for her land. Now the king at that time that she comes in is talking to who? Gehazi. Now, what had happened to Gehazi back over here in connection with Naaman? He was a leper. So if he's now a leper, where would he be confined to? He wouldn't likely be in the presence of the king. Maybe he is. Maybe the king is having like 100-foot conversation with this man. I'm not sure. But again, if we're thinking from a chronological standpoint, this event maybe even precedes the point in his life where he was struck with leprosy. That's the best I can do. All I know, there is a conversation going on between him and the king at the very moment. And guess who he's telling the king about? The king is saying, I want to hear some of the stories. Tell me, I pray thee, all the great things that Elisha had done. So I want to know about some of his great feats. And it came to pass, as he was telling the king one of these great stories, which was how he had restored to life him that was dead. Remember this particular woman, when Elisha stayed with her, he asked her what should be done for her, and that's back in chapter 4, and her answer was, listen, I'm content to live with my own people. But then Gehazi ends up telling Elisha she doesn't have any children. She has no son. Her husband is old. Elisha says, at this time next season, you're going to conceive, you're going to have a child. She did. The child grew. One day the child had something going on with his head. He's out in the field with his father. He sends him to his mother. The son then dies in her lap. She then sends back and says, you send me a servant. I'm going to go to the man of God. Her husband is kind of confused about that. Says, well, why? There's no new moon. There's no Sabbath going on. Kind of like clueless as far as what had happened. She rides hard, brings her son, her dead son, leaves her dead son in Elisha's bed, comes and gets Elisha. And again, Elisha will come back and with the power of God, raise her son from the dead. She's been away, she's back, and now you have that Gehazi telling this story to this king. You can imagine he's just enthralled with this story. And while he's being told this story, verse 5, how he restored to life him that was dead, behold, the woman whose son he restored to life cried to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi says, my lord, O king, this is the woman I was telling you about. And this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, no doubt she told him the same story, maybe even greater details from a mother's point of view. So the king appointed to her a certain officer and said, restore all that was hers and all the fruit of the field since the day that she left the land, even until now. Comments on that? Any comments on what we looked at this morning? Yes, Brother Jim.
You talk about this chronological sequence. There's a back in chapter 6, there's a little section down above me, verse 23 and 24 of 6. It says that so the bands of Syrians came no more to the land of Israel. And then the very next statement is, and it happened after King of Syria came to Israel. So here again, I only see that as being some kind of time, I don't know.
Brother Jim just points out in chapter 6, 23 and 24, that as verse 23 ends, there seems as though the king of Syria has decided, okay, we're based upon what's been done, we're going to leave them alone. But then again, things would change. And sometimes, don't forget, regarding these kings, that you have a new king that comes into rule, and you have the same name, like the Pharaohs did. Anything else? All right, then we will pick up in chapter 8, beginning in verse 7, Lord willing, a week from today. Thank you.
This light went on.
Yeah, I think